Okay. Hey folks. So in the last session, we basically added the joy schema to our endpoints so that we were able to sanitize the inputs and sanitize the outputs, and basically drive some validation just from the joy schema. So I think that is done. So what we want to do now is we want to just update our NestJS error handler in such a way that if we get a 404, we return a 404. If we get a bad request, we return the appropriate HTTP status codes. So yeah, let's get to it. So we'll start with that session. Um, Typically, want to add these. What do we want? What we're looking to do is we need to add a. Hang on, I'm not showing you the right screen. Browser. We need to take a look at these acceptors. So what we want to do is we want to be able to map our exceptions, create a error interceptor based on the type of an error that's happening. In order to do that, yeah, so trying to figure this out as well as we're doing this. So I'm going to read through this for a bit. It's going to be quiet, but bear with me. Sorry, I was not showing the browser, so yeah, I'm going to read through this documentation and we'll get started. It's possible we need something like a filter instead. Exception filter. Here we go. That's what I was trying to see. So what we're trying to do is basically implement an exception filter. Okay, so I guess we can copy this and use that as our starting point. And what we'll do is we'll add some rules based on the type of a failure that's being thrown. We can change the status code. Okay, so go over to our Visual Studio and filters, file, Right, need to rename this appropriately. So the exception filter. Okay. So by default, what it's doing is just if an error happens, it's just using the status code from the exceptions get status, and then it just throws, just returns back some other information, timestamp, URL that's associated with it. So for this handler to be picked up, what we need to do is we need to get into the app module, and we need to tell that in one of these providers. So go back. For this to work, we need to tell the provider that we're applying an app level filter and we want to use the exception filter on the app. Go over to this. Sorry, what was that? Yeah, right. Provide and use class. So let's do that. Provide and use. Let's just make it a little bit nicer to look at. Yeah, let's import our stuff. So okay, so now we can start. So let's run our application. We can test it out a little bit. We'll just try to create an error and then see if we get a response back that's a little bit organized. Usually takes a second for the very first time. Still compiling, so another 10-15. So let's say let's just give it an ID. Hello. We're expecting to see unauthorized error because we have not provided our authorization stuff. So header. So got the not what we're expecting to see, right? Go back into the code. You can see that in the exceptions handler we have, where is this? Yeah, it's in the bot service. Jump over here. What's it on? We are throwing a new failure, and this is supposed to be authentication. That's exactly where I believe we are logging this error. Oh, so where do we use our verify token? Here, token. Now, obviously, if this throws an error, it's going to end up jumping into this exception handler. So let's just add some console logs to understand what's going on here. I want to see what's in the exception, and we also, I guess that's fine. We just want to see what's in the exception. You don't care about the request or you just want the exception again. Reloaded on this. The same thing. Yeah, so it looks like we're not getting into here. Let's see, is this really the error that's being logged? Let's see. I believe it is not, because we are not seeing that. Shoot. It looks like it's not getting into this catch. least what I can see. We're expecting to see this particular somewhere in the letter, not there. So I think it's also just actually let's use the plain old console log and notice that this is running, and also want to log that an error happened. Log the error too. Ready. Let's create the error. Okay, so it went into the verify token over here and promise. So okay, so let's just rewrite. We can rewrite this method, make it a little bit easier. Or this to think, and we'll just get rid of all of this stuff because we just want the verified token. If an error happens, we will be catching it up here. Well, actually, it's just going to throw an error from here. So hopefully this time around, it should eventually work its way into the exception filter. Not service. And okay. So yeah, this might be a fairly boring session that requires a lot of debugging. Happens from time to time. So turn this. You know what? I have a feeling it's a whole lot of boilerplate for no real reason. So let's just do this. Try. We'll just go back. We'll fall back to good old try catch for now. So we'll try to return this one. Is that a promise? Yes, it is. So we'll wait and we'll return. If an error happens, we are going to still log it over here. This time it's going to be thing here as well. Error, and we will throw a failure with the error message, and it's an authentication failure. Maybe this will have a effect that we're looking for. So we have 500 and look here. Okay, so this time around we're getting into this section, and we are also, it appears that error info we're logging and the exceptions. Yeah, but it doesn't look like we're doing anything with the HTTP. So we get rid of these. Actually, get rid of this one. What if we remove that? It's designed to catch only HTTP exceptions. You just say, hey, let's just catch everything, and the exception here, just make it any object. Not to any fancy stuff with any of this. Well, we do care about the response, right? Response. Once keep the context. Status, just keep it 500 for now. This also, well, actually, yeah. Yeah, not a huge fan of copy pasting stuff. It's usually definitely faster, but it always causes like all sorts of weird issues where it doesn't quite work well with the code. Just try to avoid it as much as possible whenever possible. Or if you ever, if you end up copying and pasting like this, what we did, you should always read every single line and make sure it's appropriate for us. I'm fairly certain you can't just use this, right? Application is slightly different. It's not throwing exceptions. We have a class that's defined for exceptions, and we call it the failure class. Okay, there. We're extending the standard error with failure just so we have a bit more context on the type of an error that's happening that's appropriate for our application. You can't just copy paste everything, even if it's coming directly from the documentation. Okay, so now that I'm done talking, I'm just gonna try to see if I can test this. Okay, so now it's working. Basically, we have the same status code, we have the timestamp, and it's just saying what's the path that's causing the issue, which is path chat/hello, which the ID in this case. Why did it work? Well, the reason why it worked is because when we copied over the catch, we had it set up so that it's only going to catch the HTTP exception. We want to catch every single exception that's happening. That's going to eventually lead to a error response from our server. So that's basically converted this to any, but fairly certain that most of the time when we get an exception, that's going to be of a type failure because we are going to be trying to throw we're going to try to throw failures. So we're going to make this the default type of an exception, rename it to failure. And if it's not a failure, it would usually be a standard error, and that's still okay because failure really extends, so it should be defined, like should work. This exception filter should still work if we have a simple error that's being thrown. So here's what we need now. We know what the failures that we're getting, and we want to make sure that we identify the status based on the type of failure. So what we'll do is we'll say get HTTP status from failure, and we'll pass it our failure. And this is going to be like a kind of long method, but let's just go ahead. Just takes our failure and just create a switch based off of the failure type. And if it is authentication failure, we want to return HTTP status unauthorized. And if it's not, the default is going to be HTTP status internal server error. Okay, so we're going to run this one more time, and we want to see that this time around the status is not going to be 500. It should be unauthorized, which is 401. Okay, so we got the unauthorized status code. So you can see that this is starting to show some promise. What we'll do is we'll add a bunch more of these cases for the different type of errors that we have. What do we have? We also have a not found failure. We want to return not found. What else do we have? We have not authorized as well. Actually, this is going to take a while if we try to go off of memory. What we'll do is just go over to this list, make sure we add every single one. I'm going to copy this and just put it here for reference. So we added the authentication failure. Let's get rid of it. We added the not found failure. Get rid of it. Unauthorized. Yep, that's fine. So let's start with, well, case error is the, we need to report it. That's gone. I'm going to add the network failure. That's also, for now, let's just make it, sorry for the cough. Yeah, let's just make it default. Doesn't really matter, I guess we can remove it. Okay, we already added it. Argument failure, going to be a bad request. The same thing is going to be for the bad request failure. So let's do that. And we will also have the same thing for the validation failure. And usually, validation failures are going to be triggered by, let's just do a search in the app. They're going to be triggered by the UI schema validation. So it's going to be a bad request. It's valid. Ever get a server failure, that's also internal server. And what we'll do is, like, we have these grouped, give it a little space so it's easy. Service unavailable. Yeah, so this kind of a failure is usually good if you're trying to build flexibility in your application, in the sense that if okay, let's just say we have like a pretty complicated stack. That's where we have, I know we have two endpoints here, chats, that has like the chats and the messages, but let's assume we have like a payment or a billing type of an application where we have one endpoint that's talking to all the payment service. Let's assume we have like some kind of an error that happens with payments, and we don't want to, but we want the rest of the application still works. What we want to do is just turn off that particular endpoint, and we can say that service, that part of the service is not available. So what we can do is we can, maybe we can get to that kind of a feature later on. I don't think it's necessary for this application right now, but what we can do is we can basically say, hey, that feature is not currently available. So what we'll do is we'll just throw that error from every single endpoint that's related to the failing backend service. So so that the front end has a little bit more opportunity to try to tackle that error, in a little bit more graceful way. But we don't need to add that right now because I don't think we have. Yeah, we don't have that in our code, so that's just not. We don't have to add it right now, but we will maybe. That's necessary. All right, so we should be. Try this out. It's the one is 401 not authorized. So let's make sure we're authorized, and we'll try to like walk around with some of the input parameters and see what we get. Have to pass in for the login. And we have our sign-in token. Copy that. Scroll down to temporary sign-in endpoint, and I'm not going to get into too many details of why this endpoint being used, because we won't actually be using this. It's just there to just make my life a little bit easier to get the necessary tokens. So yeah, so here's the identity token. And that's basically what we're going to pass into the authorization header. So down to chat and try to get this. It's going to be a 404 this time around because there is no chat with the ID hello. Yeah. So that's pretty much it. Just to recap, what we did is we went over to the documentation for this website from Nest, looked up that exception filters are what we need to be able to handle all kinds of errors in one single class, and basically determine what the endpoint is supposed to return for the status HTTP status code. We copied the code and we tried to use it. It doesn't actually always work like that, so we make some small modifications to it. So rather than just catching the HTTP exception, we are going to catch all sorts of exceptions. That includes the failure class that we have been using throughout our application. And what it will do is gets the failure, and we try to figure out what the HTTP status is going to be. And for this piece of code to be plugged in to our application, we just jump over to the app module and say, hey, provide an app level filter and use the HTTP status filter for that. Pretty much it. And we changed a bit of our code in the auth service just because this style of returning the value from a promise was not allowing us to throw failure that we wanted to. So, and I think this is better. It's just way cleaner. Let's see what's going on. A little bit better. That's pretty much it. So in the next session, what we're going to do is we'll add a time to live on all the messages so that they're automatically deleted from DynamoDB